I just know that you're about to call another witness, which, according to my list, would be Chantal Robson. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
And there was a motion to limit testimony on her and also on Carly Barnes on the same documents. And I've reviewed those documents, and I'm not going to grant the motion. I'll decide the issues on a question-by-question basis. But for your guidance, it seems, based on the attached police reports, that the information that's in those reports would be the type of information that he would be allowed to ask about.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, we also filed a motion with regard to Lisbeth Barnes. Is that one that the court will address at some time?
You can't be heard.
The Lisbeth Barnes issue. I will rule on that on a case-by-case basis. But I will order that she not be allowed to give opinions about her opinions about how vigorous, etc., a prosecutor Mr. Sneddon is. I've already ruled that's out of bounds, not an issue in this case. It's not going to be a personal attack on him.
Your Honor, if I could just ask for guidance on that issue. Excluding personal attacks, certainly we can discuss with Mr. Sneddon their willingness to cooperate, what he said to them, etc., about these issues without making it a personal attack, can't we?
Within limits.
Yes.
The line there is a probative issue there, but the line about personal, her opinions of him.
Yes.
I won't allow that.
Yes.
So while we're I'm going to do one more that was there. Might as well cover it. I don't see this person on your list, though. You had a person named, there was a question about witness Michael Viner, Viner.
That's
Michael Viner, Viner, Your Honor.
Yeah, he's not on the list, but
I should address that. I'll address it.
What my ruling on that would be, I'm not going to allow him to testify about overhearing the opinion of Mr. Feldman as to veracity. That's not admissible.
If I may, Your Honor, I think we were going to file an opposition, which didn't get filed. Our position was going to be the prosecution aloud. I believe, I will double-check.
I'll withhold that ruling if you intend to file an opposition.
We do.
That person's not on the list at this point. But that's where I was going with it based on just what the district attorney had filed.
It should be filed now.
Judge, may I address the court on a matter that I indicated to the clerk that I wanted to take up with the court?
All right.
And I was told I could do it at a later time.
All right. What is the issue?
Discovery. We have a...
Does it relate to any immediate?
Yes.
Witness right now?
Yes. Not to this lady, but to the future of the day. And I want to alert the court that we have a very substantial problem, and I'd like to. I know that the court doesn't want to keep the jury waiting, but...
On which issue?
We got a list with 3 witnesses, Francine Orozco, Russ Burchim and Jimmy Van Norman. Francine Orozco.
What I'm going to do is... What I'm thinking of doing is letting the jury go an hour or so early today, because there's another issue that Mr. Mesereau wants to take up, so that we can do that when they're not waiting in the hallway.
All right, Your Honor, then I just want to ask one other thing. And while I don't want to hold things up, but I believe that this witness and the witnesses yesterday have testified to their opinion about character. And we filed the brief this morning, so I was just going to ask, when she's excused, that she's subject to recall. If the court agrees with us, then we can then cross-examine her further on those topics.
All right.
Thank you.
The court has not excused any witnesses yet. Our agreement was that the witnesses, unless specifically asked, I would not excuse them. They're still bound, because both parties have indicated they may want to recall witnesses. So no witnesses have been excused except where I've specifically excused them, and there are very few of those.
Judge, I understand. I wanted to make sure I preserved it as a witness coming back on cross-examination and not having to call her as my own witness. I believe that I would be entitled to cross-examine her on have you heard statements based on her testimony. That's all I was trying to do, was just to preserve the record for that.
All right.
Thank you.
I'll have the jury brought in. All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Miss Robson, the prosecutor asked you questions about borrowing $10,000. Remember that?
Yes.
Would you please explain why you borrowed $10,000?
The first $10,000, we had been here for, I think, a year, 18 months. And it was a lot more difficult to establish ourselves here than I had anticipated, so Michael offered to help us out for a while. So we borrowed $10,000 at that point. The second one was a car. I had been here for a while. My credit from Australia cannot be transferred, so I had no established credit in the United States. I was listed as an employee because of the cosmetics company paying through Michael Jackson's company. Because I was being sponsored by MJJ Productions, I was listed as an employee of the company. So I had asked if the company would co-sign for my car because I was unable to get the credit to buy a car, and Michael just offered to pay for it rather than co-sign.
Was it, as you recall, was it his idea to help you or was it your idea?
I had asked for help. And he was there for me. He was a friend.
Okay, was there anything, as far as you know, improper or illegal about anything you did?
Nothing.
Okay, the prosecutor asked you some questions about whether or not you had borrowed other funds. Do you remember?
Do you mean the Anthony Pellicano situation?
Yes.
Yes.
And what were you referring to?
Well, that was because the record label, the deal had been held up, and the advance was something that we needed to survive. And because it was held up, Anthony Pellicano offered to loan the money to me until the balance came through from the record deal.
Okay, now, did you ask Mr. Jackson for help from time to time?
I asked a couple of occasions with the car and the initial $10,000.
And he did help you on those occasions?
Yes.
The prosecutor asked you questions about your son's entertainment career. Did you ask for help from Mr. Jackson once in a while as far as your son's entertainment career was concerned?
No. I had called a couple of times to see if, when he was doing music videos, to see if he remembered Wade, because he said he would put Wade in his music video. To remind him more than anything. But that was all.
And to your knowledge, did Mr. Jackson help Wade with his career?
Yes, he's always very supportive. He's always very interested in what Wade did with his career. He would check on him. He would ask him to send him, keep him in touch and send, when he was doing music production, he would ask him to send him demos of the music that he was producing so that he can listen to it and encourage him and teach him what he was doing correctly and not. Always very supportive, always very interested.
Now, were you allowing Wade to spend nights with Mr. Jackson because you just wanted to further his career?
No.
Why were you letting Wade spend those evenings with Mr. Jackson?
Those evenings just happened because they were having fun together. They would play till all hours of the night. They would watch music videos. They would watch cartoons. And they'd basically just go to sleep.
Did you do that with Mr. Jackson as well?
Yes, I did.
How often?
A couple of times.
Okay, the prosecutor asked you questions about Wade and Michael throwing some pebbles at the lion cage. Do you recall that?
Yes.
How? When did you learn about Wade and Michael throwing some pebbles at a lion cage?
I think Wade had told me about it at some point after the fact. He was basically telling me that he heard the lion roar. And it didn't roar very often, so I was surprised. And he told me what they did to make it roar.
Well, was it your impression that they were engaging in animal cruelty or anything?
Absolutely not. That's the last thing that either of them would do.
I'm going to object.
What was that?
I said I object. It calls for a conclusion. It's narrative. And it's leading.
I think the prosecutor asked her about her knowledge and state of mind.
I'm not objecting to the subject matter. I'm objecting to the form of the question.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Strike the answer. Next question.
Who told you about Wade and Michael Jackson throwing some pebbles at the lion cage?
Wade.
And when did he tell you about that?
I think possibly a day or two after it happened, or that night. I really don't remember.
And did he tell you that he had tried to be cruel to an animal?
No. Wade loves animals.
Did he tell you that Michael Jackson had tried to be cruel to an animal?
No. Michael loves all animals as well. Neither of them would ever do that.
Now, the prosecutor asked you questions about the word cousin. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
And did you hear Michael Jackson use the word cousin in describing children?
Yes. He pretty much called everybody cousins, I think.
And did you know why he did that?
No. That's just something that I think at some point he may have said it so that they weren't jealous of each other, because that tended to happen.
Did you ever suspect there was something criminal about Mr. Jackson using the word cousin?
No.
Ever think there was something sexual about Mr. Jackson referring to children as his cousin?
Never.
Ever think there was anything inappropriate about Mr. Jackson referring to various children as my cousin?
No.
The prosecutor asked you questions about Brett Barnes. Do you know Brett Barnes?
I don't know him. I'm associated with him.
Okay, how so?
I met him once when he was in Chicago and Michael was shooting the Jam music video.
Did you maintain any communication with the Barnes family through the years?
No.
Would you call the Barnes family good friends of your family?
Not at all.
Okay, how many times do you think you've traveled with Mr. Jackson?
Just the once, to Las Vegas.
Okay, now, you referred to Chicago at one point in your testimony.
Yes.
Did you go to Chicago?
Yes.
And what was the purpose for that trip?
Wade was dancing on the music video Jam.
Okay, and was that a music video involving Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And was Mr. Jackson in Chicago with you?
Not with us. He was there.
Okay, and what do you mean by not with us?
Well, we weren't staying with him. We were flown in as Wade was working. And we stayed at a hotel. He did the job, and we returned to Los Angeles.
And to your knowledge, where did Mr. Jackson stay on that trip?
I have no idea.
Did you see Mr. Jackson on that trip?
On the set, yes.
Did you see him in any other location?
No.
Okay, do you know approximately when that was?
I'm not sure. I want to say 92. Maybe in the middle of 92 somewhere.
Okay, the prosecutor asked you some questions about whether you were concerned about manipulation. Remember that?
Yes.
Were you ever concerned about Mr. Jackson manipulating you?
Never.
Did you ever tell anyone you were concerned that Mr. Jackson was manipulating Wade?
No.
Ever tell anyone that you were concerned that Mr. Jackson was manipulating your daughter?
No.
Did you use the word manipulation?
Not to my knowledge.
Are there any other entertainment-related transactions that you recall either you or your son being involved in with Michael Jackson?
And what do you mean by entertainment transactions?
Any type of entertainment, transaction, project. You name it.
He did 3 music videos. He did a Pepsi commercial. And the original LA Gear photo shoot. I think those are the only things he's ever done with Michael.
Did Mr. Jackson, to your knowledge, help Wade with those projects?
What do you mean by help?
Any kind of assistance.
I mean, he decided that he would want Wade to work on it because he was the best person for the job. Other than that, no.
Okay, and to your knowledge, when is the last time Wade worked with Mr. Jackson on any entertainment-related project?
The last thing Michael performed with NSYNC I think on an MTV Music Awards, and Wade was choreographing and directing it. He put that together.
Do you know approximately when that was?
I want to say 2000, something like that.
Now, you said that many times you went to Neverland and Mr. Jackson wasn't there, right?
Yes.
And when you did that, how would you arrange to visit Neverland?
Through his office. Through Evie.
Had Mr. Jackson given you permission to visit Neverland when he wasn't there?
Yes.
And approximately when did he say you could do that?
He's always said that we're welcome anytime.
And I believe you testified that you were there more times when he wasn't there than when he was there, is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
How many times do you think you visited Neverland when Mr. Jackson wasn't even there?
Maybe 40, 50 times.
And where would you stay when Mr. Jackson wasn't at Neverland?
Object as immaterial, Your Honor.
Overruled. You may answer.
Before he had the children, I would stay in the house. But since he's had the children and they're now the children's bedrooms, we stay in the guest units.
How many times do you think you stayed in Mr. Jackson's main house before Mr. Jackson had his own children?
Maybe 15, 20 times. I'm not sure.
And where would you typically stay?
In the Rose bedroom.
Please describe to the jury what the Rose bedroom is.
It's a large-sized bedroom with an adjoining bathroom. Hardwood floors. Beautiful wood, carved wooden ceilings. Overlooks the front of the house. It's on the second floor.
And how far away is the Rose bedroom from Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Mr. Jackson's bedroom is on the ground floor. I don't know how to describe how far away. It's probably the length of 2 rooms, but on another floor.
Now, do you recall freely walking in and out of Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Yes.
And when you say bedroom, you're talking about these 2 levels.
Yes.
Okay. Did Mr. Jackson ever put any restrictions on your walking in and out of his own room?
No.
And you freely walked in and out of his own room?
Yes.
The prosecutor asked you questions about a lock and alarm. Do you remember that?
No. Oh, the chimes, yeah.
Do you recollect you're always having to go through a locked door to get into his room?
I mean, I would always knock first before I went anyway, so I don't have any idea whether the door was locked or not. But I would never just walk in. I would always knock and someone would open the door.
What typically would happen when you'd knock?
Wade would answer the door, or Michael.
Okay. And would someone open the door for you?
Do you mean?
When you knocked and someone responded, would they typically open the door for you or would you open the door yourself?
I think someone would open it for me.
Did you go into Mr. Jackson's room at all hours of the day?
At any time I wanted to, yes.
Do you recall being in his room during the day?
Yes.
Do you recall being in his room during the evening?
Yes.
Do you recall being in Mr. Jackson's room late at night?
Yes.
Did you ever get the feeling that somebody was trying to keep you out of Mr. Jackson's room?
No.
Do you recall spending much time in Mr. Jackson's room at Neverland?
I have spent time in there on occasion watching television with him, but not often.
Where would you typically watch television when you were in Mr. Jackson's room?
On the bed.
Would that be the bed on the second level?
No. On the ground level.
Okay. Now, the issue of Mr. Jackson helping you with an automobile, when did that happen?
I think maybe 93. Early 93.
And did you go to him and ask for some assistance in getting an automobile?
Yes.
Okay. And what was his response?
Well, I had asked him to co-sign. I wasn't asking for money. I was just asking for a signature. And his response was, well, why don't I just pay for it?
And did he do that, to your knowledge?
Yes.
Did you feel that he was doing that because he wanted something in return in any way?
Not at all.
Did you feel there was any quid pro quo when he helped you with the car?
Absolutely not.
Did you feel there was any quid pro quo when he helped you with money?
Never.
Did you feel there was any quid pro quo when he helped you as a sponsor?
Not at all.
Now, what was this issue? You needed him as a sponsor for what purpose?
To remain in the United States. We, permanent residents. To be able to have a green card, we had to have someone sponsor us into the country.
Did you go to him and ask him if he would be your sponsor?
I talked to him about it, and he said he would do whatever he could to do. He just instructed his office to do whatever was needed.
To your knowledge, what was done to help you?
An offer, they put me on their books as an employee of the company.
Did Mr. Jackson have to actually sign anything to be your sponsor, if you recall?
Yes.
And did you ask him to do that?
Yes. Pretty much. Basically I asked for help. So that was the only way we could stay, so, yes.
And he did help you, right?
Yes, he did.
Did you feel like you owed him anything after he helped sponsor your family to stay in the US?
No, not at all.
Now, you received some payment through Michael Jackson Productions, is that right?
My earnings from the cosmetic company was diverted through his company, yeah.
What cosmetics company was that?
Pigments. Pigments.
Where is that company located?
On Burton Way in Beverly Hills.
And you actually were working there?
Yes.
When did you begin working at that cosmetics company?
I think 93, 92 or 93.
And the idea was that because you weren't a resident, you were not supposed to be employed. Is that the idea?
I was on a working visa, but it was through MJJ Productions. I was employed to be employed by MJJ Productions only. So I managed to find this job for myself. And in order to make it legal, it had to be diverted through MJJ Productions.
And where were you living at the time?
I was living in Hollywood.
And who else was living there with you?
Chantal and Wade.
And were you the main person providing for your family at that point?
Yes.
You needed a job, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Jackson helped you get a job, correct?
Well, he helped me, yeah. I mean, he didn't get the job for me. I got the job, but he made it possible for me to be allowed to do that, yes.
And how long did that arrangement last?
Oh, I think 3 years.
Okay, so for approximately 3 years you were paid through MJJ Productions, right?
Yes.
Michael Jackson's company?
Yes.
Were you the primary wage earner for your family at that point?
Yes.
And why did that arrangement end?
Wade booked a feature film. He was working as an actor on a feature film. And because he was a minor, I had to be there with him. So I left the job and worked with him on the film.
Okay, and did Mr. Jackson ever ask anything in return for what he had done for you during those 3 years?
No.
Ever feel you had to repay him for any of that?
No.
Now, you spoke to Mr. Sneddon before today, did you not?
Yes.
And you were actually questioned by Mr. Sneddon before today, correct?
Yes.
When were you questioned by Mr. Sneddon?
Before the grand jury, I think in 93 or 94.
Was that the only time?
Yes.
And do you recall Mr. Sneddon trying to get you to agree that your son had been kidnapped by Michael Jackson?
I'm going to object. Argumentative. Hearsay, and irrelevant. It's my objection. Oh. Let me do it this way. I object. Same basis.
I'll sustain both of you.
To your knowledge. All right. To your knowledge, has your son ever been held against his will by Mr. Jackson?
Never.
To your knowledge, has your son ever been kidnapped by Mr. Jackson?
No.
To your knowledge, has your son ever been abused by Mr. Jackson?
No.
Your Honor, object. Leading. Asked and answered.
Sustained.
The prosecutor asked you questions about seeing June Chandler at Neverland. Do you remember that?
I do.
Did you see her at Neverland?
I did.
Did you talk to her at Neverland?
Yes.
Was she a friend of yours?
No.
You didn't care for her, right?
I did not.
Why?
My impression of June Chandler was that she wanted to be mistress of Neverland, that she was ordering the staff around as if she owned Neverland, that she wanted everything that went with it. My impression of June Chandler was that she was a gold digger.
Did you see her interact with Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Did you feel she was trying to use Mr. Jackson?
Absolutely.
Did you ever talk to Mr. Jackson about it?
No, I did not.
The prosecutor asked you about someone named Blanca Francia.
Yes.
Did you know Blanca Francia?
I don't know her. I remember her working there.
Did you ever chat with her?
No.
Do you remember seeing Blanca Francia in Mr. Jackson's room?
I remember seeing her go in there to clean. I don't remember seeing her in there.
Do you recall being at Neverland when large numbers of children would visit?
Yes. Once.
And when was that?
I don't remember when it was. I'm trying to work out about what age Wade would have been. It's probably around 99, 2000. There was a group of children there from the Wish Foundation or Create a Wish Foundation.
Did you spend time with those children?
Yes, I did.
What did you do with those children?
We played with them in the amusement park.
Your Honor, beyond the scope of cross.
Sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Miss Robson, you're not jealous of June Chandler, are you, because she displaced you?
Not at all.
Not at all?
Not at all.
That wasn't the feeling you had at the ranch, because she was in control?
Absolutely not.
And her son had replaced your son?
My son was there.
Yes, but he wasn't in the bedroom with Michael Jackson anymore, was he?
I don't know that he wanted to be. He was Michael's friend. They were there together as friends. I had no wish to be June Chandler.
Well, I didn't ask you whether you wished to be June Chandler. I asked you whether you were jealous of her position.
Certainly not. What position would that be?
Of being able to be close to Michael Jackson at that point in time.
I don't think she was close to Michael Jackson at that time.
You don't?
No. As a matter of fact, Michael spent a good deal.
Do you know?
Objection. She hasn't completed her answer, Your Honor.
Overruled. Next question.
Do you know how many trips they went on together?
No.
Do you know how long they spent with each other?
No.
You have no idea, do you?
No.
So you don't have any idea how close she was to Mr. Jackson at that point in time, no personal knowledge.
My personal knowledge from that weekend was when I saw Michael Jackson trying to elude June Chandler for the entire weekend.
Move to strike as non-responsive, Your Honor.
Overruled.
And you said that the defendant, Mr. Jackson here, was the person who easily created trust in people, is that right?
Yes.
And in relationship to you and your family, he created that trust very easily and very quickly, correct?
Yes.
You saw him do that with other people, too, correct?
No.
You didn't?
No.
You were the only ones that you observed him to be trust.
The only time I was ever around anybody else with Michael would have been on the set in Chicago with the Barnes family and that one weekend with the Chandler family.
So your opinion about Mr. Jackson and his ability to form trust quickly and easily has to do simply with your family?
Yes.
Now, did I understand you correctly that you stated that when you came to the country, your visa only allowed you to work for MJJ Productions?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Mesereau asked you questions about were you aware of what was going on in the evening in Mr. Jackson's room. Do you recall that?
He asked me if I'd been into the room.
In the evening.
Yes.
Now, you have no idea, once you left that room, what went on inside that bedroom, do you, of personal knowledge?
Only what my son tells me.
Well, you don't know whether they were playing video games, correct?
If my son tells me they were.
Okay, I think I asked you of personal knowledge.
That is personal knowledge from my son telling me. I believe him.
Something you saw with your own eyes or heard with your own ears, not from your son. Do you have any personal knowledge what went on behind those closed doors in that bedroom?
Not on every occasion. I was not there on every occasion, no.
For instance, have you talked to Mr. Mesereau since the testimony yesterday?
No.
Did you talk to him at all in preparation for your testimony?
We had a brief conversation about how things would be in the courtroom, yes.
And are you aware of the fact that at the time of the execution of the search warrant in this case at Neverland Valley Ranch, that there was a whole assortment of sexually explicit magazines and books that were found in Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Objection. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Sustained.
You told Mr. Mesereau in response to his questions that you came to the country without any promises from Mr. Jackson. Is that what you said?
That's my memory.
That's not what you told the grand jury back in 1994, was it?
Well, I read something different. I don't remember that.
Well, that was you testifying, wasn't it?
Well, I'm saying I don't remember it now. Apparently that's what I testified to.
Under oath?
Verbal, maybe they were verbal. What I'm saying is there were no contracts. There may have been something verbal.
It didn't say that in your testimony, did it? It said, Mr. Jackson had arranged the following.
Well, that's incorrect.
But you said it?
Well, I'm sorry. I made a mistake back then. There was never anything verbal, never any contracts.
You remember better today than you did back then?
Apparently.
No further questions.
In response to the prosecutor's questions, you said you believe your son?
Absolutely.
Why do you believe what your son told you?
We just have a very close relationship.
Excuse me, I didn't ask any questions about believing her son. It's beyond the scope of examination.
I don't think it's beyond the scope. But it's an improper question. I'll sustain the objection.
Could you clarify this issue of something being arranged when you came to the United States? What was arranged? What wasn't arranged?
Well, there were no contracts. I honestly don't know what I was referring to in the grand jury. Perhaps, from my memory, we're going back 12, 13 years. From my memory, I remember Michael saying that he would help in whatever way he could. That he had movie companies. He had, record companies. If there's something he could do, he would help. But there were certainly no arrangements. We came here and, I had to get a job to work. There were no contracts. There was nothing arranged. I didn't come here expecting Michael Jackson to give Wade a career.
Has Mr. Jackson always been available to help your family when you needed some assistance?
Object, Your Honor. Beyond the scope and leading.
I don't think so, Your Honor. He talked about arrangements.
You may answer.
Michael's a friend. And like any friend, if we needed anything, he would be there, and vice versa. We were there for each other as friends are.
No further questions.
No questions.
All right, thank you. You're not being excused. There's an issue about some other questions that I'm going to take up, so you may be called back.
All right.
For now, you may leave.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Yes. Defense will call Lisbeth Barnes, Your Honor. May I take a second? She's not right here, so we will call Chantal Robson, Your Honor.
All right, when you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk here and raise your right hand.
I do. Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Hi, Chantal Robson, Chantal. Last name Robson, Robson.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Robson, Joy is your mother, correct?
Yes, she is.
And Wade is your brother, right?
Yes.
Do you know the gentleman seated at counsel table to my right?
I do.
And who is he?
He's a friend of mine. Michael Jackson.
And how long has he been a friend of yours?
Since I was 10 years old.
And how did you meet him?
First time I met him, a trip to America. We went to record One Studios. He was a friend of my brother's.
Okay, and have you stayed in contact with Michael Jackson through the years?
I have.
How have you stayed in contact with him?
Just through phone calls. He would call and say hello to the family. And see him on occasions.
And do you think he's a family friend?
I do.
Okay, now, when did you last speak to Michael Jackson?
When did I last speak to Michael Jackson?
Yes.
A couple nights ago.
Okay, and where was that?
At the ranch.
Were you visiting the ranch?
Yes.
Okay, were you with your mom?
Yes.
Were you with your brother?
Yes.
All right, now, do you recall when you first visited Neverland Ranch?
I do.
And approximately when was that?
This was 89. I was 10 years old.
And do you remember who was with you?
Yes. When we first went, it was my entire family. My grandparents, my father, my mother, Wade and myself.
Okay, and do you remember where you stayed at Neverland?
I stayed in Michael's room.
Okay, and was anyone else in there with you?
Wade was and Michael was.
And how many nights did you and Wade stay in Michael Jackson's room on that occasion?
2 nights.
Do you recall anything improper ever going on in that room?
Not at all.
Okay, what did you and Wade and Michael do during those evenings you stayed in his room?
We just hung out, watched cartoons, watched videos, played games. You know, what normal kids do. Hang out and have fun.
Did you fall asleep on his bed?
Yes, we did.
How many times do you think you've been in Michael Jackson's room?
I've probably been there a lot of times, just sort of in and out. I've slept there 4 times.
When you slept in Michael Jackson's room, has your brother Wade always been there?
Yes.
And any of those occasions, have you ever seen anything improper go on?
Not at all.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson molest your brother Wade?
Not at all.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson touch your brother Wade in an improper way?
No.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson abuse your brother Wade?
No.
Were you ever suspicious of any touching Mr. Jackson may have done with Wade?
Never.
Has Mr. Jackson ever hugged you?
Yes, he has.
Have you hugged him?
Yes, I have.
Ever been suspicious of the way he hugged you?
Not at all.
Has Mr. Jackson ever kissed you?
Yes, he has.
Have you kissed him?
Yes, I have.
Ever been suspicious of the way Mr. Jackson kissed you?
No.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson hug Wade?
Yes.
Ever been suspicious of the way Mr. Jackson hugged Wade?
No.
Have you ever seen Wade hug Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever been suspicious of the way Wade hugs Mr. Jackson?
No.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson kiss Wade?
Yes.
Have you ever seen Wade kiss him?
Yes.
Ever been suspicious of any of this kissing?
No.
Ever thought any of it was sexual in nature?
No, it was just a friendly kiss on the cheek.
How many times do you think you've been to Neverland?
Millions. I've been, so many, I can't even remember.
Okay.
I think an average of 4 times a year.
And have you been there when Mr. Jackson wasn't at Neverland?
Yes, I have.
Have you been there a lot of times when he wasn't there?
Yes.
The first time you were at Neverland, what do you recall your family doing?
We hung out, watched movies, ride on golf carts, played in the playground, ate dinner, stuff like that.
Now, to your knowledge, did your parents know that you and Wade were sleeping in Michael Jackson's room?
Yes, they did.
To your knowledge, did your grandparents know you and Wade were sleeping in Michael Jackson's room?
Yes, they did.
Anyone ever have a problem with it?
No.
How would you describe Michael Jackson's room?
It's beautiful. It's 2 floors. There's another bedroom upstairs. His bed is downstairs. There's 2 closets. Oh, sorry, there's a closet on the right side and a shower on the left side.
How many times do you think you've been in that room? Can you guess? Not guess, excuse me. Can you estimate?
5 to 10 times.
During the times you've been to Neverland when Mr. Jackson was there, did you ever feel that you were being kept out of his room?
No.
Have you been in his room during the daytime?
Yes, I have.
Have you been in his room during the nighttime?
Yes, I have.
And you have been in his room late in the evening, correct?
Yes.
Did Mr. Jackson ever put any restrictions on you not coming into his room?
Never.
Now, the first time you visited Neverland when you and Wade stayed in Mr. Jackson's room, where did your parents stay, if you remember?
In the guest units.
And where did your grandparents stay?
In the guest units also.
Do you recall your parents staying in the main house before Mr. Jackson had his own children?
I think my mother did stay in the main house at one point.
Alright, do you know that for sure?
I don't.
Okay, have you been through all the rooms in the main house?
Yes, I have.
Okay, you've been through them many times?
Yes.
Do you recall a jacuzzi at Neverland?
Yes.
Ever been in the jacuzzi?
I have.
Ever been in there with Michael Jackson?
I have.
Ever been in there with Michael Jackson and your brother?
Yes.
Did you see anything improper go on when you were in the jacuzzi?
No, not at all.
Do you recall what Mr. Jackson was wearing when you were in the jacuzzi with him?
Shorts.
Have you traveled with Mr. Jackson?
No, I have not.
To your knowledge, has your family traveled with him?
Yes.
What is your knowledge about that?
I know that my brother and my mother have been to Vegas. I take that back. I have been to Los Angeles with him. On my first trip, I went to Los Angeles, just me and my mom. Sorry, me and my brother.
What is your occupation?
I'm a dancer.
Now, are you aware of any efforts Mr. Jackson made to help your family move to the US?
Yes. He helped us, like any friend.
What do you recall him doing?
He basically just helps us with immigration. Helped us, you know, get certain attorneys to help us deal with moving over here.
Did you ever feel that he was doing this because he wanted something in return?
No, never.
Did he ever help you with your career?
No.
No further questions.
Good morning, Miss Robson.
Good morning.
You first met Mr. Jackson in 1990, is that correct?
89.
89. Alright, and that was in Australia?
No, that was in America.
Alright, so the first time you met Mr. Jackson was the first time that you visited Neverland Ranch?
Yes.
Did Neverland Ranch seem to you to be an awe-inspiring place when you first visited it?
I'm sorry, and
Awe-inspiring.
Yes. It's a beautiful place.
Very impressive?
Yes.
Were you impressed with meeting Mr. Jackson the first time you met him?
Not really impressed. I was young, so the idea of the fact that he was being famous really didn't mean anything.
Okay. It didn't strike you as anything remarkable to meet a superstar at that time when you were 10 years old?
No.
Had you ever listened to his music?
Yes.
Did you have any of his albums?
Yes.
And then after your first visit to Neverland, you returned to Australia? With your family?
Yes.
And your brother Wade?
Yes.
And did Wade communicate with Mr. Jackson during that period of time?
Yes.
Did he call him?
Yes.
Did Mr. Jackson call Wade?
Yes.
Would this be a frequent occurrence?
Yes.
And would they talk on the phone for hours?
Yes.
Weekly?
Yes.
More than once in a week?
Yes.
During that period of time, did your brother seem to be fascinated with his relationship with this star?
Objection. Vague.
Overruled. You may answer.
He was fascinated with the friendship.
It was something very important to him, wasn't it?
Yes.
Did they send faxes back and forth?
Yes.
How often would they do that?
I don't remember. It wasn't as often as the phone calls.
But this was a very special bond that Wade had with Michael Jackson, wasn't it?
Like any other friend, yes.
But this was a special friend, wasn't it?
I don't know what you mean by special.
Well, did Wade have anybody else that he had a relationship with that you could compare to his relationship with Mr. Jackson?
Me.
Okay, but let me paraphrase, or let me rephrase that. Any relationship with an adult like he had with Mr. Jackson, an adult who's not a member of his family.
No.
And your first night at Neverland you stated that you slept in Mr. Jackson's bed?
Yes.
Bedroom?
The second night. The first time I was in the room.
Alright, so the very first night that you went to Neverland you spent the night in Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
In his bedroom, yes.
And on that first night, you slept downstairs in the bedroom, correct?
No.
You slept upstairs?
Yes.
Did you, or I'll rephrase that. Were you interviewed by Scott Ross, an investigator for Mr. Jackson, on May 2, 2005?
Yes. Not quite sure if that was the date, but, yes.
That was just a few days ago?
Yeah.
And did you tell Mr. Ross that you recalled the first night that you slept downstairs, and Wade went upstairs and slept with Mr. Jackson?
No. It would be the other way around.
Okay.
Michael and Wade slept downstairs and I slept upstairs on the first night.
Alright, so Mr. Jackson and Wade slept together separately from the area that you slept in?
Yes.
Why was that?
Because I left and went upstairs.
Why did you leave and go upstairs?
Because I was a little older at that point and I felt like I was interfering in Michael's bedroom, so I left and went upstairs.
Because you wanted to give Mr. Jackson some privacy?
Yes.
And he was alone with your brother at that time?
Yes.
And your brother was 7 years old?
Yes.
And that night, your brother slept in the same bed with Michael Jackson?
Yes. I told him to come up with me.
You told him to come up with you?
Yes.
Was that because you felt like he shouldn't be sleeping in a bed with a grown man?
Not at all.
Then why did you tell him to do that?
Because I didn't want to make Michael feel like two people were invading his space.
Something about that first night made you feel uncomfortable, didn't it?
No, not at all.
Didn't you say you felt more comfortable the second night to Mr. Ross when you spoke to him a few days ago?
Comfortable with my friendship with Michael, yes.
And that next night, you slept in the same bed with Michael Jackson?
I did.
And your mother knew about it?
Yes.
He was 35 years old?
Yep.
And you were 10?
Yep.
Was that the first time you'd ever done anything like that?
Done anything like what?
As a young girl, sleeping with a grown man who's unrelated to you, that you just met.
That was the first time I'd ever done that. It's not the first time I've ever slept with somebody over 35.
As a 10-year-old, did you sleep with someone over 35, other than Michael Jackson?
I've slept with my dad.
I'm talking about an unrelated person.
No, that was the first time.
As a child, how many unrelated men did you sleep with that were over the age of 30?
None.
Just Mr. Jackson?
Other than my father, yes.
Whose idea was it that you sleep in Mr. Jackson's bed?
It was actually our idea.
Sorry?
My brother and I. It was actually not an idea. We just fell asleep.
Did Mr. Jackson discourage this? Did he say in any way that this is not appropriate for two small children to be sleeping in the bed with a 35-year-old unrelated man?
No.
And as you sit here today, as an adult, you think it's appropriate for a 10-year-old girl to sleep in the same bed with an unrelated 35-year-old man that she's just met?
I think it's appropriate for a 10-year-old girl to sleep in a bed with a friend.
Alright, what about a 35-year-old man that she has just met? That's my question. Do you think that's appropriate?
If she feels comfortable that he is a friend.
If the 10-year-old thinks it's okay, she should do it.
And the parents. Yeah.
Something you would allow?
Yes.
What about a 7-year-old boy?
Yes.
You would allow your own 7-year-old son to sleep with a 35-year-old man that he has just met?
If I trusted the man, yes.
Do you think that type of trust can be earned in one day?
I don't think trust is always earned.
How do you gain trust, other than earning it?
I think it's a feeling. It's a friend.
Mr. Jackson's pretty good at that, isn't he, at gaining trust?
I don't understand how you could say somebody's good at gaining trust.
He makes you feel very comfortable when you first meet him, isn't that true?
I think it depends on who's meeting him.
Well, you felt very comfortable, true, the very first day?
Well, I was his friend.
And your mother felt very comfortable the very first day, true?
My mother had already met him 2 years prior.
But she just met him as an acquaintance. You know that, right?
They spent a lot of time together before that, though.
They had spent what?
They spent time together before that.
On how many occasions?
Just the once when they were in Australia. But she actually spent hours and had conversation and got to know Michael, so she had a relationship prior.
So your testimony is that your mother knew you were going to be sleeping in the same bed with Michael Jackson that night?
Yes.
Did Michael Jackson ever refer to you as a member of his family?
No.
Did he ever refer to Wade as a member of his family?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Are you aware that there are other boys that have spent the night in Michael Jackson's bed?
I am.
Do you know their names?
Some of them.
Which ones do you know?
Geordie Chandler, Macaulay Culkin and Brett Barnes.
Mr. Jackson has been very generous to you, hasn't he?
It depends on what you mean by generous.
Well, he's allowed you the run of his ranch anytime you wanted, true?
Yes.
And he picks up the tab, correct?
The tab at his house. It's like me going to any other friend's house and spending time there.
Neverland's not like any other friend's house, is it?
No, but I have a lot of friends that have beautiful homes. And when I go there, they allow me to eat for free.
And Mr. Jackson has given your mother loans in the past?
Loans?
Yes.
Yes.
And at Neverland, you pretty much get to do whatever you please as a child?
Well, I don't know about whatever you please. I mean, you're protected. You can't.
Within the bounds of safety.
Yes.
You pretty much have the run of the ranch, true?
Yes.
Get to stay up late?
Yep.
Eat all the candy you want?
Yes.
There are really no rules, are there, except for your safety?
Depending on whether your mother has certain rules for you or.
But when you're away from your parents and when you're with Mr. Jackson, you get to do whatever you want.
Well.
Pretty much, true?
As long as they're not what your mother's told you not to do.
All of these families that you've mentioned spend time with Mr. Jackson, right, the boys of families?
Yes.
And all of these families have one thing in common, don't they? They all have boys?
And sisters.
Right. But each one has boys?
Yes.
And each one of those families has a boy that forms a special relationship with Mr. Jackson, isn't that true?
Your idea of special relationship, yes.
Well, Mr. Jackson had a relationship with Wade that was far closer than the relationship that you had with Mr. Jackson, true?
Yes.
And Mr. Jackson chose Wade to sleep in his bedroom night after night after night?
I don't think Michael Jackson chose Wade to sleep in his bedroom.
Well, he allowed it, true?
There's a difference between allowing and choosing.
Well, you don't really know what he chose, do you?
I think that we had the ability to leave.
That's a yes or no question. Do you know what Mr. Jackson was choosing when he and Wade were sleeping in the same bed together?
No.
Ever heard of the Apple Head Club?
No.
Never?
Apple Head Club? No.
How about the Do Head Club?
No.
Have you ever heard those expressions?
Yes. Not club.
Was Wade an Applehead?
Yes.
Do you know how many times Wade slept with Mr. Jackson alone in his bed?
I do not.
And Miss Robson, you really have no idea what happened between Mr. Jackson and Wade on those many nights that they slept alone behind closed doors in Mr. Jackson's bedroom, do you?
Yes, I do.
You weren't there, though, were you?
It doesn't matter.
You're just judging that based upon what Wade told you.
Based upon what my brother tells me and my friends tell me, yes. But just like anything, we base a lot on what people tell us.
Would it surprise you to learn that there has been an expert who testified in this case that up to 50% of all children.
Objection to the question.
I haven't finished the question.
Referring to other testimony.
Based to challenge her credibility.
Sustained.
Do you think all child molest victims divulge, as children, that they've been molested?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence, beyond the scope, improper opinion.
Overruled. You may answer.
Do you think that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Do you think that all child molest victims divulge the fact that they've been molested when they are children?
I honestly have no idea. I haven't studied up on all the requirements of a child molester.
Do you have an impression of the type of shame that would be associated for a child to admit that he's been molested?
Again, I don't really know what goes through somebody's mind.
There would be a great deal of guilt associated with a family, parents, that allowed their child to sleep with Michael Jackson or an adult. Any adult, if they found out that that child had been molested by that person, wouldn't there?
I don't think there would necessarily be guilt. I think there would be anger and they would do whatever they could to have that person not around.
It would upset them, though. It would be disturbing, wouldn't it?
Yes.
That's a feeling they'd like to avoid, wouldn't it?
No, I think it's a feeling that they would want to solve.
But if they chose to deny that feeling, you could understand why, couldn't you?
I don't know. I've never been put in that position.
I have no further questions.
Miss Robson, if you thought your brother had been molested by Michael Jackson, would you go to a lawyer first to seek money?
Objection. Requires speculation, argument.
Sustained.
The prosecutor asked you questions about whether or not you believed your brother Wade felt his friendship with Michael Jackson was important. Do you remember that question?
Yes, I do.
And you said you thought so, right?
Yes.
Why do you think so?
Because I think that anybody that gains a friendship with anyone thinks that that relationship is important. Otherwise, they would not be friends with that person.
And was it your belief that your brother had a good friendship with Michael Jackson?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
Yes.
Did you ever see a problem with that?
No.
The prosecutor asked you about a special bond between Wade and Michael Jackson. Remember that question?
Yes.
And did you think he had a special bond with Michael Jackson?
I think like any other friend.
Do you think you have a special bond with Michael Jackson?
I do.
Why?
Because he is my friend and I love him.
Do you think Mr. Jackson has a special bond with your mom?
I do.
Why do you think that?
Same reason. We're friends, and we're there for each other.
Now, the prosecutor asked you about whether or not you were comfortable with the fact that children have slept in Mr. Jackson's room. Remember that?
Yes.
Are you comfortable with that?
Yes.
Why?
Because I trust Michael Jackson.
Why?
Because it's a feeling that I have. He's a friend, and he's never, ever made me feel like I shouldn't trust him.
Now, the prosecutor asked you questions about the words applehead and doo-doo head, right?
Yes.
Have you heard those words before?
Yes, I have.
Let's start with applehead. Where have you heard the word applehead?
Michael has called me and my brother Applehead.
Where have you heard the word doo-doo head?
Michael has called me or my brother Doo-doo Head.
When Michael Jackson called you applehead, did you ever get suspicious that some crime was occurring?
No.
When Michael Jackson called you doo-doo head, were you ever suspicious that there was some sexual reason for that?
No.
When Michael Jackson called your brother applehead, did you ever suspect some abusive type of thing was going on?
No.
Objection. Leading.
I think he opened that, Your Honor.
Same objection.
The answer was no. Next question.
When Mr. Jackson called your brother doo-doo head, did you ever suspect something nefarious was happening?
No.
The prosecutor asked you questions about victims of child molestation, okay? Did you ever think your brother was the victim of a child molestation?
I did not.
Why not?
Because he would have told me.
Did he ever tell you that he had been improperly touched?
No, he did not.
Did your brother ever tell you that he had been molested?
No.
In fact, did your brother ever tell you, I have never been molested by Michael Jackson?
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Isn't it true you don't think for 1 second that Mr. Jackson ever abused your brother?
That is true.
You don't think for 1 second that Mr. Jackson ever molested your brother, do you?
That is true.
You don't think for 1 second Mr. Jackson ever touched your brother in a sexual way, right?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
I do not think for 1 second.
Why not?
Because.
Objection. Asked and answered.
Sustained.
Prosecutor Auchincloss asked you questions about a family feeling guilty for allowing molestation to occur. Do you feel guilty about anything involving your relationship with Michael Jackson?
I do not.
Why not?
I have no reason to feel guilty. It's a normal friendship.
To your knowledge, does your brother feel guilty about anything involving his relationship with Michael Jackson?
Objection. Speculation. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Have you discussed with your brother the prosecutor's allegations that Michael Jackson improperly touched him?
Yes.
Have you had many discussions with him?
A couple.
Your brother's pretty upset with these allegations, isn't he?
Objection. Hearsay. Leading.
Overruled.
Yes, he is.
Why?
Because they're not true.
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Are you upset with these allegations?
I am.
Why?
Because they're not true. And a friend of mine is being accused of something that's not true.
Have you ever felt guilty about having a friendship with Michael Jackson?
I have not.
Objection. Asked and answered.
The answer is in. Next question.
Do you feel guilty about ever staying in Michael's room?
I don't.
Do you feel guilty about ever visiting Michael's room?
I do not.
Objection. Leading.
Overruled. The answer was given.
Did you ever get the feeling Michael Jackson was trying to talk you into being in his room?
Never.
Did you ever get the feeling Michael Jackson was trying to talk your brother into being in his room?
Never.
Objection. Leading.
No further questions.
Overruled.
You said that you trusted Michael Jackson?
Yes.
Would you trust him never to give alcohol to a child?
Yes.
Would you trust him never to show pornography, adult erotic materials to a child?
Yes.
Would you trust him not to keep those things laying around his bedroom when he has children in that room?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Improper question.
There's evidence that he had.
Overruled. You may answer.
Can you please repeat your question?
Would you trust him not to have adult erotic materials sitting around his room when he had children in his room?
I don't know if that's a trust issue.
Well, would you like him? Would you trust him enough to think that he'd keep those materials separate from children?
It would be nice. But I also understand it's somebody's house and sometimes things are lying around.
Would you trust him enough to? Would you trust him not to have statues, figurines of nude women in bondage attire sitting around on a desk where he has his own children visiting him?
I don't know if he's ever had that, so.
I'm asking you, would you trust him not to do that?
Yes.
So if he did any of these things, he would be violating your trust, wouldn't he? You'd have to evaluate your level of trust, wouldn't you?
No, I don't think it would violate my trust.
If he showed adult erotic materials to a child that he's been giving alcohol to, wouldn't you have to reevaluate whether you trust this man or not?
Objection. Argumentative.
Overruled. You may answer.
Repeat the question, please.
My question is, if Mr. Jackson showed adult erotic material to a child that he'd been giving alcohol to, you'd have to reevaluate whether you really trust this man or not, wouldn't you?
If Michael Jackson did do that, yes, you would have to reevaluate.
So you wouldn't trust him if he did that?
If he did that, yes. But I don't believe he did it, so.
I have no further questions.
You've heard about the allegations in this case, right?
Yes.
You've discussed them with your family, right?
Yes.
You don't believe Michael Jackson ever molested the Arvizo children, do you?
Objection. That calls for a conclusion. Impermissible question.
Sustained.
Do you trust that Michael Jackson never molested any alleged victim in this case?
Same objection.
He raised the issue of trust, Your Honor.
It is, well.
Sustained.
Do you trust Michael Jackson?
I do.
Why do you trust Michael Jackson?
Because he is my friend.
Objection. Asked and answered. Beyond the scope.
Overruled. You can complete your answer if you didn't.
Let me withdraw the question.
She answered it.
Okay.
But I'm not sure she wasn't cut off in the middle.
That's okay, he's my friend.
Are there any other reasons why you trust Michael Jackson?
He has never, ever given me any reason not to trust him.
Do you think he's honest?
I do.
Do you think he's a sensitive man?
I do.
Do you think Mr. Jackson would ever harm a child?
I don't, no.
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
Do you trust?
Wait a minute. I'll strike the answer.
Do you trust that Mr. Jackson would?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I'm going.
Your Honor, the prosecutor asked her all these questions about her trust in Mr. Jackson. I'm just examining on those issues.
You may on some issues. And some you may not.
Okay.
So take it one question at a time.
Do you trust that Mr. Jackson would never give alcohol to a cancer patient so he could commit the crime of molestation?
I do.
Objection. Leading. Also calls for an ultimate issue, ultimate conclusion.
I'll sustain the objection.
Please tell the jury every reason why you trust Michael Jackson.
Objection. Asked and answered.
Overruled. You may answer that.
He has been my friend for many years. He has cared for me like an older brother and a father. There has never been one time in my life where he has ever turned his back on my family. Vice versa. My family has never turned our back on him. We love him. It's hard to explain. When you have a friendship with someone and you know that it's a true person and it's a friend.
I'm going to object as a narrative.
Overruled. Were you through with your statement?
It's just that he's a true person and he's a friend, and I trust him always.
No further questions.
Just one last question. In your eyes, Mr. Jackson can do no wrong, can he?
That is not true.
I have nothing further.
No further questions.
All right, you may step down.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Yes. The defense will call Lisbeth Barnes.
When you get to the witness stand, please remain standing. Face the clerk right here, and raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
Do you, Marie, Marie, Lisbeth, Lisbeth, Barnes, Barnes?
Thank you.
Good morning, Miss Barnes.
Good morning.
Where is your home?
In Melbourne, Australia.
And you have a son, right?
Yes, I do. And a daughter.
And what is your son's name?
Brett.
And your daughter's name?
Carly.
Okay. Do you know the person seated at counsel table to my right?
I do.
And who is he?
Michael Jackson.
When did you first meet him?
19 December 1991.
And how did you meet him?
Well, actually, when I met him personally was in December of 1991, but I had spoken to him for several years prior to that. He invited us to his home in December 1991, and that's when I met him for the first time.
Okay. Now, you said you'd been speaking to him for a while before that?
Since 1987.
And why were you speaking to him?
Because he had called, my son had written a letter to him when he was very young, when Michael was touring Australia. And he received the letter and he pulled out a letter out of the bag, that's what he told me, and it was Brett's, and he decided that he'd call him to thank him for the letter. And he spoke to all of us, and we developed a friendship, and he continued calling us and speaking to us. And then one day he decided to invite us over to his home, and since then we've been regular visitors.
Do you still consider Mr. Jackson to be your friend?
Oh, definitely.
Where are you staying at the moment?
I'm staying at Neverland Valley, at his place.
How many times do you think you have stayed over at Neverland?
Several times. I can't count.
Can you give an estimate?
No.
Would it be 10 times?
Could be, yeah.
Could it be 20?
No, maybe not 20. Probably about 10, I guess, or a little bit more, a little bit less. I'm not sure. I know it's several times. I can take time and count back, but I haven't thought about it.
Okay, and your first visit to Neverland was when? What year, if you know?
December 1991.
Okay, and who did you visit Neverland with?
Our family. My husband, my 2 children.
Okay, and how long did you stay there?
About 3 weeks. Well, we stayed with Michael for that 3 weeks. He took us to Disneyland, to Las Vegas, and, yes, we were together for 3 weeks.
Okay, and where did you stay during those 3 weeks?
Sometimes at Neverland Valley, sometimes at Disneyland, and Las Vegas, depending on the places we were visiting. And sometimes at the hotel in Los Angeles.
Okay, now, let me direct you to the first night you were at Neverland, okay?
Aha.
What did you do?
He took us on a tour of the place, and pretty much that. And then we watched a film at the theater, had dinner, sat down and talked, and pretty much that.
Where did you stay that evening?
In one of the guest units at the ranch.
And do you know where your children stayed that evening?
Same, one of the other units they're just a group of units, and they were in the next one.
To your knowledge, has your son ever stayed in Michael Jackson's room at Neverland?
Yes, he has.
And when was the first time that happened?
I couldn't tell you. I couldn't remember. I can't remember. I'm sorry.
To your knowledge, has your daughter ever been in Michael Jackson's room?
Yes, she has also.
And to your knowledge, has she ever stayed in his room?
Yes, she has.
And how about you? Have you ever been in his room?
Yes, I have. And I have been invited to stay over because we were watching videos and talking, and he just suggested, well, why don't you stay here, because it was raining outside. And he said, well, you can stay here. And I stayed for a little while, but then I went back to my room. It was just more comfortable.
How many times do you think you've been in Michael Jackson's room at Neverland?
Oh, several times.
Has it been all times of day?
Yes. I had pretty much free reign, just anytime I wanted to, I was allowed to.
Now, let me ask you about that. You've been in Michael Jackson's room during the day, right?
Aha.
You've been there during the evening, right?
Yes.
Have you been there late into the night?
Well, yes. Pretty much when we were watching videos, it would go pretty well late into the night.
How often do you think you've watched videos late into the night in Michael Jackson's room?
Several times.
Okay.
Or times we were just talking, or...
When you visited Neverland with your children, did you feel that you had free access to Michael Jackson's room?
Yes.
And why did you feel that way?
Well, he gave me free access. I remember a particular occasion when I wanted to borrow some CDs, and he said, just come into my room and, that is where they are kept, and he showed me where the selection of CDs were kept, and he said, anytime you want to come and borrow the CDs, feel free to do so.
And how would you describe Mr. Jackson's room?
Just a huge room and, with lots of things in it. Very, very warm but nothing ostentatious. I don't know what sort of description you're looking for.
Is it 2 levels? Do you recall an upstairs and a downstairs in the room?
Aha.
Have you been into both parts of his room?
Aha, yes.
Do you recall having to knock on a door to get into his room?
Well, I do that normally when I go into, doesn't matter whose place I go, it's just common courtesy to knock before you enter. But I could have the door was never locked, so I could go in any time I wanted to.
Were you ever denied access to his room?
Never.
Did you ever go into the room when your children were in the room with him?
Yeah.
Have you done that often?
Yeah.
Now, what have you seen your children doing with Mr. Jackson in Mr. Jackson's room?
Just talking, watching films, and listening to, just reading stories or just having fun. Just chilling out, you know. Playing with games, toys, whatever.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson do anything inappropriate with either of your children?
No, never.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson inappropriately touch your son?
Never.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson inappropriately touch your daughter?
Never.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson hug your son?
Yes.
Have you ever been suspicious of the fact that Mr. Jackson hugged your son?
No.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson hug your daughter?
Yes.
Have you ever been suspicious of Mr. Jackson hugging your daughter?
No.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson kiss your son on the cheek?
Yes.
Has that ever made you suspicious of Mr. Jackson?
No.
Ever seen Mr. Jackson kiss your daughter on her cheek?
Yes.
Have you ever been suspicious of that behavior?
No.
Okay, now, you gave your son permission to stay in Mr. Jackson's room, correct?
Yes, correct.
Did you give your daughter permission to stay in his room?
Correct.
Why?
Why not?
Did you trust Mr. Jackson?
Implicitly. I always trusted him and I still trust him.
Why?
Because he's just a very nice person. And you just feel when you can trust someone and when you can't trust someone. And I had total trust in him.
And your son traveled with him at some point, correct?
Aha, correct.
When was that?
It would have been January 1992, I think.
Did you allow your son?
January, February.
Did you allow your son to travel with Mr. Jackson?
I allowed him, yes.
Why was that?
Because, to me, it was a learning experience, and, visiting other countries, and I couldn't, it didn't bother me at all.
Did you ever suspect that Mr. Jackson had inappropriately touched your son?
Never.
Have you discussed with your son allegations that Mr. Jackson inappropriately touched him?
Well, there were allegations, and we had talked about it, and I have asked him. I said, look me in the eyes and tell me that nothing has happened to you, that Michael has never done anything inappropriate to you. And he said
I'm going to object to the response as hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Move to strike the answer.
Stricken.
As you sit here today, do you think Mr. Jackson has ever inappropriately touched your son?
I believe that's character opinion. I'll object, unless this witness is a character witness.
Sustained.
No further questions.
Miss Barnes, good morning.
Good morning.
Your child Brett was how old when he first met Michael Jackson?
9.
And was that on the occasion of your first visit?
Going on 10, yes.
He was 9 years old?
He may have been 10.
And your daughter was how old?
12.
And your daughter's name is what?
Carly.
Carly? Am I doing that right? Carly?
Aha, Karlee.
And both of them stayed with Michael Jackson that first night that you were at Neverland?
Well, we all stayed together and they, like I said, they slept in one of the guest units, and we slept in the other guest unit.
They slept in one of the guest units. Who are they?
My children, Brett and Carly.
All right. They both stayed in one of the guest units?
That's correct.
And you stayed in a separate guest unit?
That's correct.
And Mr. Jackson stayed in his residence?
That's correct.
All right. And the guest unit, of course, is an entirely different structure than his residence, is that right?
Aha.
You would have to walk outside in some distance before you would get to his house?
That's correct.
Did you continue to stay in the guest unit while you were there?
Yes.
And for what period of time did you stay at Neverland before you finally returned to Australia?
Well, we were at Neverland on and off for over a 3-week period, but we didn't stay at Neverland the whole time.
How long did you stay at Neverland?
Well, it was a few days in Neverland and a few days outside of Neverland, coming back, so altogether, I couldn't tell you exactly how many days altogether.
Was your husband there as well?
Yes, he was.
And other members of your family?
Well, my son and my daughter, and that's the complete family.
Okay. You didn't have any aunts or grandparents or cousins or anything like that?
No.
So it was the 4 of you, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you wandered between Neverland and other locations in California, is that right?
And Las Vegas.
And Las Vegas. Did you travel with Mr. Jackson during that time?
Yes.
So he took you to different locations, is that right?
That's correct.
At what stage did your son begin to stay in his room or with him in a hotel room, together?
I don't remember.
Well, the first time you're telling us.
It's not the first few nights. It could be, I'm not really sure exactly when.
By about the 3rd night?
Could be. It could be a little bit later.
4th night?
I don't remember.
This is a trip that went about 3 weeks, is that right?
That's correct.
The trip was paid for entirely by Mr. Jackson?
That's correct.
And that included all of the transportation for you, your husband and your 2 children from Australia to California and back, is that right?
That's correct.
As well as all of your housing accommodations, travel needs and entertainment, is that right?
That's correct.
Did he purchase gifts for the 4 of you while he was there?
Yes, he did.
And by the 4th night, your son was sleeping in his room, is that correct?
No, I didn't say by the 4th night he was sleeping in his room.
What night was it, then?
I'm not sure what night it was.
Was it within the first week?
It could have been. It may have been. It may not have been. I don't remember.
But he was sleeping with your son in the same bed before this trip was over, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Was he sleeping in the same bed with your son for an extended period of time?
No, not continuously, no. Just on an off basis when they were, the times when my son would fall asleep when we were there, and he stayed there and, rather than having to go back to, outside into the unit.
Your Honor?
Thank you. We'll take our break.